Most agency owners think that incentives make people work harder, but that is not always true. Sometimes incentives make people work harder at the exact wrong thing. And this is where it gets dangerous, because you can have a team member who looks motivated, looks busy, looks like they're doing the job properly, but the entire compensation structure is quietly pushing them to actually make decisions that hurt your clients, hurt your retention, and ultimately hurt your agency. So in this video, I want to break down how to actually think about incentives for your team members, because if you get this wrong, you don't just waste a bunch of money, you actually train your team to optimize for the wrong outcome. And once that happens, you can end up with a business where everyone is technically doing what they're paid to do, but the company's actually moving backwards, which obviously no one wants. Recently, I was on a coaching call with an agency owner, and he asked me a really good question. He found a CSM, a client success manager. Apparently, this guy was really good. He wanted to hire him. The CSM wanted around a $3,000 base and a 3% of ad spend. I said to him, okay, cool, right, let's pause there. What is that actually incentivizing him to do? Not what does it sound like it's incentivizing him to do, not what do we hope it incentivizes him to do. Because if you pay a CSM a percentage of ad spend, you're incentivizing that CSM to get clients to spend more money on ads. Now, on the surface, that sounds fine. You could say, well, if the client spends more money, they get more leads, they get more appointments. If they get more appointments, they get more sales, everyone's happy. But that is not necessarily true, because what if the client doubles their ad spend, but their cost per appointment doubles alongside it? What if the quality drops? What if they are spending more, but their ad campaign is performing worse? In that situation, the CSM gets paid more, but the client is not actually winning. And that's the problem. The incentive is not aligned with the outcome you actually want. You don't want your client success manager to be rewarded just because the client spends more. You want them rewarded because the client is actually more successful and making more money. These are not always the same thing. And this is where agency owners get themselves into trouble. They look at incentives as this magical thing. They think, oh, if I just add a commission, if I just give them a bonus, if I just give them some more upside, they'll perform better. But incentives are not magic. Incentives are instructions. You're telling someone, this is what matters. This is what I care about. This is what I want you to optimize for. And human beings are very good at playing the game you put in front of them. Even if the game damages the business and provides a different outcome to what you're actually trying to achieve, the first rule is this: never create an incentive until you are very clear on the behavior it will create. Not the outcome you want, the behavior it will actually create within that CSM, within that whatever role that is. Because those two things are often very different. Let me give you another example. Let's say you have an appointment setter and you pay them $5 for every booked appointment that they book. Very simple to understand. They make a call, they book an appointment, they get $5. From the setter's point of view, that is incredibly easy to understand. If I book this appointment, I get paid $5. If I book 10 appointments, I get paid $50. There's a very tight connection between the action they take and the reward. And that matters more than most people realize, because the tighter that reward loop is, the more motivating that incentive becomes. In a perfect world, imagine this: the setter books an appointment, hangs up the phone, and then instantly $5 lands in their bank account. Ping, just literally $5 goes straight in there. They feel it immediately. They know exactly what action created that outcome. I made a call, I booked the appointment, I got paid. That is a powerful incentive loop. Now, compare this to something like you tell the appointment setter, I'm not going to pay you per appointment. I'm going to pay you a percentage of closed revenue once the client closes the deal. On paper, that actually is more aligned, right? That sounds better. It's more aligned with what you are trying to produce, which is more money for your clients. Because now the appointment setter is thinking, well, I only want quality appointments. I only want appointments that actually show up. I actually only want appointments that are going to buy. And logically, that makes sense. Again, it's aligned. But now look at that from the setter's perspective. They make the call. The lead then has to obviously book in the appointment. Then the lead has to show up to the appointment. Then the client has to run a good sales process. Then the offer has to be good. Then the pricing has to make sense. Then the lead has to buy. Then the client has to actually report the sale properly and be honest about it. Then the commission has to be calculated. Then maybe the setter gets paid like weeks or months later. There are too many steps between the work that they did and the reward that they're going to get. And the more distance you create between someone's action and their reward, the weaker their incentive actually becomes. This is such an important concept to understand, because in theory, things might look great, but in reality, it's not actually that effective. Distance kills motivation. The longer the distance between the action they take and the reward they get, the less motivated they're going to be and less effective the incentive is, right? If someone cannot clearly see how their work turns into money, the incentive starts to lose power. And this is why overly complex incentive structures usually fail. You can sit there with a spreadsheet and build some mad formula. You can say, okay, well, we're going to pay a small percentage of ad spend, multiply by the show rate, minus the cost per appointment, divided by cost per lead. You can create some crazy thing, right? Including retention, client satisfaction, whatever else you want to throw in there. And in paper, it might look really clever. And in theory, it might look really good. But if your team member has to open a spreadsheet and study algebra to actually understand how they get paid, you've already lost, because the incentive is no longer emotionally connected to the work they're actually doing. They can't feel it. They can't see it. They can't wake up in the morning and say, if I do this specific thing today, I make money. And that is what you want. You want the incentive to be simple enough that a team member can explain it it back to you in one sentence. I get paid when I book an appointment. I get paid when a client stays for another month. It's very simple to understand. If they can't say it simply, they probably won't be motivated by it because it's just too complicated. Now, does that mean you should always pay appointment setters per appointment? Because there's a trade-off. If you pay purely per appointment, you might get more appointments, but you might also get a low quality appointments and a higher no-show rate, all right? Because people just could be booking in appointments, not really connecting with them because they don't care about the show. They care about just the appointment itself. So at that point, you need to define what actually counts. Not just any appointment, a qualified appointment booked into the right calendar. Maybe they only get paid if the lead actually shows, right? To make sure they have a really good conversation with them, get into their pain, right? But again, be careful. The further you move the reward away from the action, the more you reduce the power of the incentive. So you're always balancing these two things, alignment and how short the reward loop is. Alignment means the incentive points at the right business outcome which you want. A short reward loop means that the person can clearly connect their work to the reward. If you have a short reward loop without alignment, people work hard on the wrong thing. If you have alignment without a short reward loop, people understand the logic, but they don't feel motivated day to day. The best incentives have both. They're aligned with the outcome you want and they're close enough to the person's actual work that they can feel the reward. So bring it back to the CSM example, right? If you pay a CSM based on ad spend, the incentive is immediate and easy to understand, but it's obviously not aligned based on what I said earlier, because the CSM might push spend even when it doesn't make sense. If you pay a CSM based on retention, that is more aligned with that agency's actual outcome. You want clients to stay. You want clients to be happy to refer you. You want clients to keep paying you every month. So saying for every client you retain this month, I'll pay you a bonus, that makes more sense. But then you have another problem, which is the CSM might say, hold on, retention isn't fully in my control. What if the media buyer is bad? What if the ads don't work? What if the client has a terrible offer, terrible sales team? What if the offer's broken? And they're not completely wrong, but because client success is supposed to own the success of the client, they might not personally click the buttons in the ad account. They might not personally actually take the sales calls. They might not personally be the one creating accountability across the delivery team, things like that, right? But they should be asking, why is the media buyer not fixing this? Why are the appointment setters not calling leads fast enough? Why are the show rates really low? Like, what's going on there? All of that is client success, not just hopping on a call once a week and saying, yeah, everything looks good, here's a report or whatever, right? So for a CSM, I'll be thinking about incentives around retention, client health, client communication, speed of issue resolution, everything that is genuinely tied to the client success. But I'll be very careful with anything that rewards spend for the sake of spend. And if you give people the wrong instructions, don't be surprised when they follow them. And there's a true story that explains this whole situation perfectly, right? Back when India was a part of the British Empire, they had a huge Cobra problem. They had way too many Cobras. So the British government thought, simple solution, what we'll do is we'll pay people for every dead Cobra they bring in. Makes sense. You bring us a dead Cobra, we give you money, everyone's happy. The assumption was that the locals would go out, hunt Cobras, reduce the Cobra population, and the problem would be solved. But that's not what happened. What do you actually think happened? Well, people started actually farming Cobras. They literally started breeding Cobras so they could then kill them and then hand them in for a reward. And then when the government realized what was going on and what's happening, they stopped the program, but the Cobra farmers released all the Cobras and the Cobra population exploded, doing the complete opposite of what the British government actually wanted. And that's what happens when incentives are designed badly and they're not connected to the right outcome you want. And this happens in agencies all the time. You pay someone based on book calls and suddenly the calendar's full of bad fit leads. You pay someone based on ad spending and suddenly every client needs to scale spend even when the numbers aren't making sense, right? You pay a media buyer based on lead volume and suddenly the CPL looks amazing, but the leads are absolutely rubbish. And we actually had this same thing with Gym Launch when I was doing the white label appointment setting for them. We had this problem where every single time the lead cost went up, the media buyer team was expanding the actual location, the target area inside the ad account. So what that meant was that the cost per lead dropped, but when my appointment setter spoke to the leads and put them in, the show rate also dropped because people realized they were 10 miles away from the gym, 15 miles away from the gym, and they're like, oh, you know what, I'm not going there. So we had this whole problem with like this whole battle with the media buyer team to be like, if your cost per lead goes up, that doesn't mean you just put the targeting as a higher radius, as a bigger radius. You need to actually just do better ads, right? You need to do more things. You can't just increase the radius. That has a knock-on effect to us, which means you get a lower booking rate and a lower show rate. And then Gym Launch was saying to me, oh, your appointment setters aren't doing a great job. And I'm like, they are. And it becomes a whole messy situation where you've got two different departments that are battling because they've got their own set of incentives. And there's a thing, like you've paid them to do that. If your target is cost per lead, you're paying them to reduce the cost per lead. And that's the scary part. The team is not necessarily being lazy. They're not necessarily trying to be malicious and trying to destroy your agency. They're just playing the game you created. So if you're an agency owner, before you add any commission plan, any bonus, any profit share, any performance incentive, I want you to ask 4 questions. Question number 1, what behavior will this actually create? Not what result do I want? What will this person actually do more of because this incentive exists? Question number 2, can they control it? If the reward depends on 10 other people doing their job properly, the incentive will feel unfair and it will lose power. Question number 3, how quickly do they get a dopamine hit from the actions they take? If the work happens today, but the reward comes 3 months from now, it's not going to be as motivating as you might think. Question number 4, can they explain the incentive in one sentence? If they can't, it's probably too complicated. And I know some people watching this are going, yeah, but Aaron, my business model is more nuanced than that. We have different metrics, we have quality controls, we have multiple departments, we have clients in different niches. And I get it, but there's always going to be a way around it. There's always going to be, trust me, there are companies way bigger than yours with way more things going on, and they have managed to find a solution. So just think about it, sit down, take some time, and really think about how you can tie up all the incentives together. Most of the time, the best structure is simple, clear, and slightly imperfect, because a simple incentive people actually understand will usually be a perfect incentive that nobody feels connected to. So when you're trying to incentivize your team, keep the reward close to the action, but still make sure you're thinking about the quality of what they're doing. So to summarize, number 1, incentives are instructions. They tell your team what to actually optimize for and what you care about. 2, alignment matters. Make sure that the incentive points at the business outcome you actually want, not a vanity metric that looks good on a spreadsheet. 3, distance also matters. The further the reward is from the action, the weaker the motivation becomes to actually do them actions. Number 4, simplicity matters. If the team member can't understand how they actually get paid, the incentive will not work properly. And number 5, every incentive has a downside. Your job is not to create a perfect incentive. Your job is to create one where the upside is worth the trade-off and the downside is controlled. Because the truth is, incentives can absolutely make your team perform better, but only if they're aligned with the right outcome. If they're not, you don't create a high performance team, you end up creating Cobra farms, right? And the last thing you want is a team full of people bringing you dead Cobras, getting paid, and making the real problem much worse. So before you pay someone more money with an incentive structure or something like that, just have a think about what game am I actually teaching them how to play, because whatever game you create, your team will learn how to win it. And if it's not aligned with the incentives and what you're trying to achieve, it's going to be an absolute nightmare. Like I said, you're going to be building Cobra farms, which is not what you want. So if you've got any questions about any of this stuff, please comment down below. I respond to every single comment. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.